Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. We have an intimate group. Nothing will stop us from doing Equity by Design. Tonight, it's 7 p.m. on the East Coast in the US. I know we have some people here from Asia, so good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're coming from. We are really excited to have you. We have literally 100 and some people who've signed up for this recording or this session. But this actual live group will be pretty intimate. We are very, very delighted to welcome you, and particularly to welcome our good friends, Jacinta Williams and Shelley Paul. I'll just quickly introduce I'm Homa Tavangar, and my co-founder of the Big Questions Institute, Will Richardson, is also here. And we are really delighted to welcome you to this webinar that gives a preview to our 2-day workshop on Equity by Design. That workshop is going to take place over 4 hours on September 21 and 22. But tonight is sort of a special preview, taster, and also just really excited to get to know and get to introduce Jacinta Williams and Shelley Paul. And truly, nothing could stop them from being here with us tonight. Not Hurricane Ida, not laryngitis, none of that. And they come with a lot of stories about all of that. Jacinta is a native of New Orleans. Her family lives in New Orleans, and she has at least a dozen family members staying with her now who are taking shelter from the hurricane. And she's still here and, graciously sharing with us during this session. A little bit about Jacinta. She is a diversity, equity, inclusion practitioner with over 17 years of experience in education and 10 years experience in leading and facilitating DEI strategy. She has worked in a wide variety of schools and institutions, and most recently was the head of equity and inclusion at the Atlanta International School, and has done a lot of really rich facilitation, instructional coaching. She's a former teacher working with individuals, teams, and all kinds of organizations strategically addressing diversity, equity, inclusion, including concepts of intercultural competence, anti-racism, and justice, and incorporating it into systems and structures, programming, and practices. And her partner, Shelley Paul, also previously was at the Atlanta International School as the head of research and learning design. And Shelley provides coaching, creative and strategic consulting, process design, and facilitation for leaders, teams, organizations, and communities, and has launched Second Circle Consulting. Shelley has over 20 years of experience in independent and international education and adult learning. She has learned design at Stanford's D School, and a really amazing thing. Hopefully we'll see a little bit of that, but I know Shelley will do more in the longer session. She models and facilitates a lot of creative and sustainable, humane, anti-racist learning, and can draw a stick figure version of anything you request. And I personally have enjoyed being in sessions, seeing Shelley's art and creativity come to life, like any idea come to life through her drawings. So we are really delighted to turn it over to Jacinta and Shelley.
Thank you so much, Homa, and thank you, Will. You can hear the dregs of my laryngitis. I apologize for that. I hope that you can hear me okay. We're thrilled to be here with you all this morning, afternoon, and evening. And we are going to be interactive. We have a short time together, but we wanted to really make sure we packed it with something that would be usable for you all to take away, and hope that you enjoy being in community together with us, because that's always part of the most important aspect of what we do together. So we do have some slides, but we're going to try to come in and out of them so we can also see each other's faces as much as possible. If you aren't on camera, that's not a secret invitation, but rather an overt one. If you are willing to let us see your faces, we love it, but we understand if you aren't able to, or if you prefer not to. So you've met us through Homa's wonderful introduction. We partner together across all kinds of work, but doing DEI, JEDI, equity work together is one of the main ways that Jacinta and I get to collaborate. She is my teacher as well as my facilitation partner, and I feel lucky for that reason. So before we get started with our content, we would love to have everyone just say hi to each other in the chat. So just tell us your name, even if it's on your Zoom rectangle, where you call home, and one word about how you're entering our experience today.
I'll start. My name is Heather. I'm calling, or I call Singapore home, and I'm entering today excited.
Thank you, Heather. It's nice to meet
Heather,
you. Pat from Calgary, Canada.
Welcome, Pat.
Palo Alto. Hi, Jovi. Hi, John.
Palo Alto, John. Welcome, Kevin from Park Lane Harbor. Welcome, Patricia and Steve. Welcome, Tina and Maria from Atlanta.
Oh, hi, Tina and Maria both. I see curious, open, intrigued. These are great.
Yeah.
If you haven't put that in the chat yet, please take a second and do that. Well, we're really pleased to be here with all of you. In our brief time together today, we're going to try to touch on 5 key things. We're going to begin to look at principles of equity by design, begin to consider the impact of design on the system, structures, experiences, and ways of being and doing that we all are in, identify an equity challenge in our communities, and co-create a definition of belonging. Before I continue, we have a little participant guide that you can take away with you. We'll use a little bit of it during our experience today, and then there's some reflection that you'll be able to follow through on, hopefully coming out of this webinar. In just a moment, we're going to put up a 1-question poll around your response to this quote. I just want to give you a second to let it sink in. Racism and inequity are products of design. We would like to know, just by a 1 to 5 ranking, 1 is strongly disagree and 5 is strongly agree. That won't be up on the screen. So 5 is strongly agree, 1 is strongly disagree. To what extent do you agree with the statement that racism and inequity are products of design? You can aim your phone, if you have it handy, at this QR code on the screen, and it will take you to the poll. Or you can go to that URL, slido.com, and enter 684578, and we'll be able to see your responses as you enter them. 1 is strongly disagree, and 5 is strongly agree. Racism and inequity are products of design. I never get tired of watching the bars go in real time. gonna go just another second or two. So we have,
There's a
Mostly-
number 3 in the chat. I don't know if you're able to add that in as admins, but there's a number 3 from the chat. So
Perfect, Toma. Thank you.
thank you.
I can put it in.
Okay, thanks, Jacinta. Since we are such a small and mighty group, we would like to actually invite you all to speak into the space if you're so willing. We would love to hear from a couple of volunteers on what number you put and why you put the number you did. You can raise your real hand or your blue hand or
Unmute yourself.
unmute yourself since we're so small. John, I see yours.
Yeah, I was by design. Yeah, I'm just the only extra element to design that made me agree somewhat is that it maybe it's by design, but not always quite so conscious. So to me, conscious versus unconscious design, you know, it's strange to think of unconscious design, but I somehow think that could be a thing, you know?
Yeah, really appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Who else would like to share?
Steve, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I'd echo John, and I think to some degree, it's by design, but it's not always. People, I think, oftentimes are oblivious to the impact, so they think it's about something else. So it's by design, but they don't. But it's not necessarily with that intent. But that
Thank
outcome.
you.
Thank you, John.
Any last thoughts before we move on from this poll? Will, did you just see that in the chat?
YouTube link.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are welcome. They're just waiting there for something to start and assuming that this was the point of the gathering, was to have a bunch of people in a space together with no one leaving. And so they're having a great time chatting, but I don't think it was what was intended, Will. Keep trying anyway.
Thank you all so much. We'll get ourselves sorted. All right, I'm going back to sharing for a few seconds while we get our community grows before our very eyes.
Why don't the people here continue the conversation? Yeah.
All right, so welcome to those who are just joining us. We've basically said hello, and we have, since so many more have come, we've just done a quick poll in response to how much we agree with the statement that racism and inequity are products of design. And the majority of folks who were in the session with us rated a 4 or a 5 for agree or strongly agree. And had some thoughts about whether it's conscious or unconscious design, which is really juicy perspective that I think is a great thing to bring into our conversation. And then we've shared out.
Perfect. Thank you, Shelley, and welcome to everyone who just joined us. So you see a picture on the screen, and the question is simply, what do you notice? Feel free to use the chat to just sort of ideate, what do you notice about this picture? And we'll ask maybe 2 people to come off mute to share to the whole group. But if you want to place your reflections in the chat box, that would be great. Different heights and equity. Can the person in the wheelchair even ride the bicycle? One size bike doesn't fit most. Seems to be the same size for everyone, even though it doesn't seem to be working for them. It's equal but not equitable. Inequity. Yes, Peter, we're going to put the link to the Zoom in the YouTube chat, so they'll be joining us shortly. Thank you for that.
It's already in there about 3 times, so they should be
Thank
coming.
you, Will. They should be on their way. Okay, they have the same color. Any other thoughts about what do you notice about this picture? Great, so before we show the next picture, just wanted to stop for a moment here and just really highlight that no one in this picture is having the best experience, right? Even this person who fits the bike or the standard, there are costs to that experience that, to John's point, and I think it was Steve's point earlier, it may be unconscious and invisible consequences and costs, but there are costs. And it's just a simple idea that the loss that is occurring for 3 people does not balance the gain achieved by 1 person. It's the simple idea that the average person never benefits from the suffering of others. Like, what is this person gaining in this particular picture? It's really, in the grand scheme of things, not much. So I want to show you a second picture here.
I'm going to pause and give the participant guide link in the chat for those of you who joined us a little bit late. You can just pop that and hold it off to the side, but we are going to use it. So I wanted to make sure that everyone has access.
Thank you, Shelley.
Sure.
So what do you notice now when you look at the second picture? Again, you can feel free to pop things in the chat, or if you want to call out, feel free to raise your blue hand or your real hand, and we'll call on you. Yes, we also know there's no real average person, definitely. Susan.
When you design for the average, everybody loses.
Loses. Okay, they have bikes that fit them. Thank you. Any other thoughts there? Equity with this underlying assumption that everyone actually wants to ride the bike, and who gets to determine that, right? Everybody can participate if they would like to. They have opportunity and access to do that now, and they can make a choice whether they do it or not. Perfect. And so here, right, we use this as a physical representation. A lot of times when we talk about design thinking, it's about products. But when we think about equity by design and what's within our control in our careers and what we do every single day, it's also around systems, structures, practices, policies, behaviors that create inequity, and how do we actually begin to reshape those and redesign those to create the conditions for everyone to be able to breathe and thrive, for everyone to have access. So while this is a physical representation, we like to extend this to the systems, structures, and practices within our school communities. And just wanted to show you the rest of that quote by Equity X Design, is that racism and inequity are products of design. That's the bad news, right? That it exists. But the good news is, because they're products of design, they can be redesigned. A lot of times when talking to people who say, we need to fix the system, we need to fix the system. And I always say, no, you don't need to fix the system, because the system is doing what it has been designed to do. We actually have to break the system and redesign it so it does create a better reality for all people who are in it. So with that, we want you to think about an equity challenge that you may be experiencing in your classroom and or your school community. You can go as small or as big as you would like. What are some structures, systems, practices, behaviors, policies, et cetera, that would benefit from a redesign in your own classroom or your own school community? We know that that's a big question, but we just want you to take about 3 minutes to silently reflect and jot down some notes, because we will come back to it throughout the next 30 minutes or so. What are some structures, systems, behaviors, practices, etc., that would benefit from a redesign.
Welcome to the Lost YouTube Souls. We're happy to have you here.
Take about 1 more minute.
If you feel inclined, we would love to have some of your thoughts in the chat where folks can see, but you certainly don't have to.
Thank you, Susan, valuing all perspectives and different ways of knowing. Fewer students with less internalized oppression, seeing that manifest within the school community and in behaviors. Anyone else want to share what challenge you're thinking of or challenges? Student evaluation.
Yep.
Big one. Yep.
Time schedule.
Yep, Randy talked about scheduling, and we'll get into that in the bigger workshop, like different avenues and lenses through which you can look at it. Hiring, admissions, assessments, those all three are huge. Family following community principles, great. So as you can see, based on some of the thoughts in the chat, hiring, admissions, families following community principles, community involvement, ensuring that students not only feel like they belong, but know they belong to a community. Sometimes that can feel really overwhelming. Like, where do I even begin? Where do I start? How do I tackle this or begin to address this so I can create this better in partnership with other folks, reality in my community? So one of the things that we tell people a lot of times is always starting with stories. What are the stories? Many times we look at numbers, but what are the stories? What are the qualitative lived experiences of people within your school community? And how do you know that? How do you gather that to begin to address the challenge from the most appropriate lens? So we want to share a story with you today from stories that we've collected across our work with school communities. And I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Would anyone like to read this out loud for the group? Feel free to raise your hand or take yourself off mute. We would appreciate if someone can read this quote story from a 10th grade student. Don't be shy.
Jacinta, I can do it.
Thank you,
Thank
Annalie.
you.
I am so tired of the casual use of the N-word by students ignorant of its history and impact, or who blatantly believe they are entitled to use it to be funny and joke around, to ask the permission of Black students to use it, and to take consent as a possible answer. They think we are okay with it, Black students. It makes me feel like nothing, and I cannot concentrate in class after they joke with me about it. If I say anything, it gets worse. It is more than teasing, it is torture for me. I truly hate being at this school. 10th grade student.
Thank you so much, Annalie, for first reading that out loud for the group. Greatly appreciate it. So again, this is a story from a 10th grade student in the school community that we've collected over time. And there are several things that are happening underneath this story and this statement and the student's experience. So we want to pose a question to the group. If you, knowing with you what you know right now, what is the equity challenge that is underneath the student story or equity challenges? And we would invite you to put that in the chat. What are some of the equity challenges that need to be addressed in structures and systems, policies, practices, behaviors that are underneath the student story? The conditions in the school community that is making it possible for this to even happen.
And we're not trying to be tricky. There are several things going on here that add up to an array of challenges. So think about one lens or angle that you might consider.
Yeah. And the idea is to suspend judgment. There is no perfect answer or right answer. Whatever is coming to your mind, feel free to put that in the chat. Lack of empathy and understanding. Lack of education, student voice, lack of policy of hate speech. Could be a school leadership team not stating and teaching why this is not acceptable. Consent as a possible answer, some lack of accountability. Do the adults know what's happening in the community? Student voices. Lack of support. Other students not being aware. Right. Will faculty even implement a policy or practice when events happen? Is there a place to report it? What does it even mean to be seen or be validated, and who is being validated and who isn't? Are there student allies who will speak up and not be a bystander, but actually speak up when they see something happening in the school community? Great. Safe environments. That one student is able to give voice for a whole group of students. Great. Thank you all so much. And many of the things that you raised are some of the challenges that we also pulled out from this particular story. So from this particular story, there were several challenges that came out for the group. And it was one, is there is an unclear reporting system, and someone sort of spoke to that around the structures, the use of hate speech, lack of community accountability, but also this idea of, are we even repairing the harm that is happening within our community is one lens to look at this problem through, or this challenge. There's a politicized perspective of DEI work within the school, making it harder to address and name. There isn't psychological safety for BIPOC students, and in this case, Black students, to learn and meet their fullest potential. They feel unsafe at school. There was a lack of cohesion with DEI curriculum and focus at school. It was person dependent and not system dependent. So those were all sorts of challenges that could be addressed, right? You could approach this challenge through any of those lenses and get to a different place, right? So what we want you to do right now is to return to your challenge that you just identified. What might be some entry points or lenses to begin to explore this challenge? Right, you started with this big idea, hiring, admissions, student evaluation. What are some of the entry points? What's underneath it? If you were to ask the 5 whys or lenses to begin to explore this one challenge. And we'll give you about a minute or two here just to jot down some thoughts. Again, this is not about perfection and having the right answers, but to just get some of your juices flowing to think about how you might address this in your community. Mhm. And again, feel free to, Susan, that is a great question and a great segue. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Feel free to, again, put your ideas, questions, thoughts in the chat box. Courage. And so one of the questions that if you all see Susan just asked, it's so big, it's so much to do. When we look back at that challenge, you all came up with dozens of reasons, right, of what could be underneath that. And we need to address all of those things. It's like, okay, there is so much. Sometimes we get into this decision paralysis, analysis paralysis, like with many other things, and we don't know where to go or where to start or what to do. And it's hard to know what those next steps should be. And we offer an approach to solving the most persistent equity challenges in your school community. And a piece of that approach is really following the Equity X design, Equity by Design principles by Equity X. And you'll see those design principles on your screen. And here is an example of Shelley's amazing drawings and stick figures. So definitely true about that. And so the first one is design at the margins. I don't know who is a primary school teacher, but I taught primary school, and one of my favorite books to read to the children was The Big Umbrella. And it's this idea that this character has this one umbrella and people are being rained on, but every time that the character allows another person to get under the umbrella, it continues to expand and expand and expand, and it makes room for everyone, even for the people who are on the outside. And so what design at the margins is really asking ourselves, who are at the edges of our school community, or who is at the edge of this equity challenge that you've just identified? Because the people at the margins, the people on the edges, are actually living with the failures of the system. So when we design to take care of the edges, we actually create a stronger experience for everyone because the people in the middle are still covered and the umbrella itself is actually stronger. So designing at the margins is one way to approach your challenge. The other is to start with yourself, like thinking about the intersections of our identities, our race, our gender, our income, our citizenship status, and many other characteristics. How do they shape who we are and how we see the world and our relationships to other people, as well as our relationship to the challenge itself? That's really important for us to always constantly be thinking about and reflecting on. The third is see power. When you look at your challenge, who has power? And it's many different types of power. Who has social power based on their identity? Who has situational power based on their role, their title? Who has power based on their proximity to other people in leadership or their proximity to the dominant culture in a particular community? And recognizing those types of power is important because equity by design, the underlying principle is folks who are experiencing the problems actually probably know better how to solve them. And the problem is the power is so imbalanced that they are never giving the opportunity to do that because we typically as designers who have more privilege tend to hoard that power from people who can actually design for themselves to create this better world that we're all looking for. Because
let's circle back to conscious versus unconscious. It's not necessarily conscious, but that's actually as dangerous or more dangerous.
Yes. The fourth one here is make the invisible visible. I'm glad our former colleague Maria is on the call. Maria has this saying, you have to name it to tame it. If you can't name something, you are going to be able to unsolve it. Going back to unconscious versus conscious. If it remains in the unconscious, it will remain insoluble. So it's really important to help make the invisible visible. And finally, that last one is speak the future. We are trying to create something that may have never, I'm going to say, in our recent history, the things that we know may have never existed or we have limited models of. So when we ask people, what is equity? How does that look like? Sometimes it's even hard to imagine because we may not have ever seen it before. And so speaking the future is really important if we're actually going to get to a place that is going to be different. What is going to be different because of the work that we're doing together every single day? And so we won't have time to get to this reflection, but in your guide on page 2, just want to reconnect sort of the theme of our workshop, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can, which is a lovely quote by the great author Ash. So starting where you are and starting with yourself, how does your identity and your role intersect with the challenge that you just wrote and the different entry points for that challenge? Use what you have. What is in your sphere of influence? Where do you have power? What people and processes are available to help you? Do what you can. How do you understand more? How do you begin to make the invisible visible? And most importantly, whose voices and experiences need to be heard so you are actually addressing the root cause of the problem based on the people who are experiencing the failures of the system because of that.
And as Jacinta said, and as we've already shared, we almost universally start with stories, finding ways and avenues for people to truly speak their experience and believing them. That's the second bit, is hearing it and believing it. So what does this all add up to? One of the things that we talk about, and someone asked it in the chat earlier about helping everyone feel that they belong. The reason we want to design for equity, either break the systems and make them over or start and create something new altogether, is because fundamentally what we want is for everyone in our communities to feel fully valued, fully seen, fully heard, protected, to feel like they belong. And so designing for equity moment by moment and challenge by challenge ultimately adds up to communities where everyone actually belongs. We're going to spend the last few moments of our time together today thinking about belonging. We want you to take just 2 minutes and reflect about a time in your own life when you have felt a really strong sense of belonging. This can be anytime, any context, so personally, professionally. So take 2 minutes and you have space for notes. You might want to capture them, or you can just think about a story in your own mind. Take just a few more seconds. Okay, thank you so much. In just a moment, we're going to put you in a brief breakout with 2 other people. And there's 2 things we want you to do while you're in there. I just want to point out that the Slido link, it has a second question and it's on your guide if you have lost access to it, but I'll show it to you again before we put you in breakouts. What we want you to do in your 8-minute breakout is each person briefly tell your story. So share your story with your 2 partners and then talk together about the common traits, attributes, qualities you're hearing across the stories. And what we're going to do collectively is identify attributes of belonging. So it's not so much about the details of the experience eventually, it's about what it feels like as a person to really feel like you belong somewhere. So before we go in breakouts, there's the QR code and there's the Slido code again in case you need it. And we're going to put you in breakouts for 8 minutes and we'll send you a 3-minute timer to switch into sharing your ideas into the Slido. Ready, Jacinta? Thank you.
Breakouts are open. I'll move folks who are,
Yeah, I opted out.
yeah, you're in the room by yourself. You were in the room by yourself. But I'll move people who are